boca y mis palabras proclamar tu alabanza. Lord, open my lips and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. Amen. Well, Jesus sounds awfully fierce. He almost sounds like he's mad. He doesn't sound like how we typically expect the gospel to phrase his words of love and forgiveness and so forth. He sounds rather agitated. And so he used these very, very strong words. How he's impatient that the world is not on fire. And how he feels stress until this baptism of fire that he has come to fulfill isn't kindled yet. And I think what the gospel is trying to point out to us in this, very dramatic and harsh use of hyperbole is there's this other passage, and I'm an Episcopalian, so I don't have it memorized. But somewhere in the scriptures, it says something about how God is not pleased with lukewarm Christians. I'm not exactly sure where that is, but it's in there. And and this passage is what it's trying to say is that you have to make up your mind. You have to decide if you're going to be on fire for God or if you're going to be a lukewarm Christian. He doesn't want lukewarm. He doesn't want middle of the road. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Let's look for the middle ground. Let's look for, sometimes you have to make a choice. Sometimes you have to make a decision. And he's saying you need to make a decision about whether or not you're going to follow me. And you have to do it in the context of your times. That very last section, he's talking about you can look at the sky and figure out, the portents and tell how the weather is going to play out. But can you not read the times? What are the times in your context? For a couple of Sundays now, we've been talking about making choices. And this one is also about making a choice, making a decision. And I think that making a choice, making a decision, is a question of an everyday situation. All of our decisions and choices have consequences for how things play out in our lives. And even the smallest decision, even the smallest choice, will eventually lead to where we are right now. All the decisions that you've made, all the things that you've chosen, have led to where you are at this very moment. And let me give you something of a more graphic example. I used to be a jail chaplain. I used to work with women in jail. And, they made some bad choices. So one day I was working with this mom. And she had been in jail, in and out for several times. And I think she had like 3 or 4 boys. It's been a while now, so I can't remember exactly. But I know she had a whole passel of boys. And so one day I was trying to explain to her how her choices affect everything that was going on in her family, even the smallest choice. Because here's the example that I used for her. So, not because she's a bad mother, but perhaps because she didn't know any better, and perhaps also because she didn't have good resources. Oftentimes, she did not make breakfast for her boys. She would give them a little bit of money and then scoot them out the door. Well, the boys were hungry, so they'd go to the store and they'd buy a soda and a bag of chips. And so that would be their breakfast, a soda and a bag of chips. So they would go to school, and a soda and a bag of chips is not good sustenance for studying and absorbing information and education. And so the boys would become either irritable or hyperactive or bored or, for many reasons, they didn't do well in class. And they would start acting up. Perhaps because they were frustrated because they couldn't understand what was going on around them, or they, didn't feel good because, they didn't have the proper nutrition. For whatever reason, they were always getting in trouble in classroom. So they would end up in the principal's office. And then the principal would call the mom. And the mom would have to leave work to come and get the kids. And this happened over and over, so that eventually her kids hardly ever made it through one grade of school. And she hardly ever could keep a job because she was constantly getting called out to go pick up the kids from school. So this cycle that they had been going on for years. And so they couldn't seem to make any progress, in their lives. And you could pinpoint it almost to that one choice that she didn't make breakfast. That's how her choice played itself out in the rest of their lives. How that one choice made a difference in how poorly her children did in school. Now, she didn't know, she didn't understand the consequences of that choice. She was just, trying to get the kids out the door so she could get to her job. And maybe she didn't have breakfast material. I visited a family one time that didn't have plates. The kids all ate out of a pan, standing up at the stove. They didn't have a dining room table or anything. They, had plastic spoons, and they would just eat out of the pan from the stove. Sometimes they just didn't have the resources to properly live. But that had consequences, long-term consequences. And it kept them in this cycle, this loop, that they weren't going to be able to get out of unless somebody intervened and started making better choices. So all of us, we make choices, we make decisions hundreds of times a day. We make a decision. And those of us who are here, we most of the time make good choices. That's why we are where we are. We're by and large doing okay. We've got jobs, we've got shelter, we've got clothes, we've got food. We're doing all right because we've made good choices. And sometimes the choices were made for us by the people who raised us, but for the most part, in our adulthood, we've made the choices that have led to us being here. This church has made choices. We chose, and when we were on Locust Street, we chose to bring the chapel with us. We could have just left it there. It could have been demolished. It could have just gone on to something else. But no, we chose to bring it with us, and so there it sits. And then when this building was built, again, we didn't have to keep the chapel, but we chose. We chose to keep the chapel. And now we've got these two buildings that are absolutely fantastic. And we have flexibility, and we have variety, and we have a lot of ways that chapel has been a blessing to many, many people in many, many ways. Because we made a choice. We made a decision. And that decision helped this congregation be who it is today. There have been other decisions that we have made. As a denomination, we've made choices. And sometimes those choices, they weren't easy choices. They were hard choices. In the 60s, there were churches in the South that decided that they were going to participate in the civil rights movement. And they were severely criticized. Many clergy marched with Martin Luther King, and their congregations fired them, ostracized them. Their own families were split. And this is what Jesus is saying. When you make a decision, when you decide for the gospel, sometimes there's a price to pay. Now, in the letter to the Hebrews, we heard the description of what price some of us paid. Thankfully, I don't think that we face that possibility here of being drawn and quartered. Of course, in the Middle East, you could get your head lopped off. But here, if we make a tough choice, if we make a tough call, we might find ourselves at odds with our neighbors, our families, our friends. Some of the unpopular decisions that the church has made have caused a lot of turmoil in the church. But we made the decision based on the gospel. And so we paid a price. We paid a price when we decided that we were going to ordain women. Was that a mistake? But we lost people, we lost churches because we made that choice. But we stood on the side of the gospel, and we were willing to sacrifice because it was the right thing to do. History will tell us. History has already shown in many ways that taking those stands, as unpopular as they were at the time, were the right choice. Was it right to have integration? To give back black people equal rights? To demand it in their name? To stand with them as they fought for it? Was that the right choice? But it cost us. Just like it cost us to ordain women. Just like it cost us to ordain homosexuals. Now, there's always going to be an outside group. There's always going to be someone that got left out or marginalized or discriminated against. I mean, at one time the Chinese were discriminated against. If Bill were here, he'd remind me that the Irish were not welcome some places. And certainly as a Mexican American, I've experienced prejudice and discrimination personally. So who are the next ones that we have to make a decision about? How about immigration? Where are we on that? Where is the gospel mandate on that question, on that issue? And if you decide that you're going to go with the gospel mandate, which says, welcome all, welcome the stranger, you don't turn your back on immigrants, you might not be popular with some of your friends. You might find yourself at odds with some people that you held close to you. And you might have to pay a price for it because you stood and you made that choice. And history will say, was that the right choice? Was that the right thing to do? Was that what God would have wanted us to do? Now, we as a congregation have made some tough decisions, some tough choices. But in retrospect, it's been a good choice just pretty much every time. Even though at the time it was a hard choice. It took us 2 years to decide to go along with the housing development that's going to go up at some point next door. It took us 2 years to make that decision. But we made it. And even though the building isn't even up yet, there are a lot of people who are looking to this example as being the thing that was right to do, and that others may also do, may follow as the example that we made. Now, there isn't always a huge price to pay for the decisions that we make, especially as a community, because we stand together, we kind of support each other, and in the unity, there is the strength. So we won't necessarily be pariahs or be tortured or any of that kind of thing. But we have to be willing to make those choices even if that was going to be the case. And can we? Do we have the conviction, the passion, that fire that Jesus was so ardent about us having? Not that lukewarm response, but that fire response, that baptism of fire that Jesus called us to in today's gospel. asking us to read the times. What's the context of our time? Where are the tough choices that we have to make? It's never easily apparent when issues are very complicated. It's not always black and white. It can get very complicated. So, in order to clarify, in order to make the good choices, then you look at the Gospels. You look at the example of Jesus. You look at what would God have you do. And then it's not that hard to see. It's not that it's not hard to do, but it's not hard to see what we should do going forward. The gospel is our plumb line. It's our measuring stick. It's our way of gauging which direction we need to be in. Regardless of national politics or local customs or even personal preferences. The gospel overrides all of that. If we're on fire for God, if we've got that fire that Jesus was looking for. So, the future will have more choices for us to make. And I hope that choice always comes after some serious looking at what the gospel is asking us to do. Amen.